Kathleen, thanks so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. So let's jump right into it. You work with various companies on a day-to-day basis in the area of sales enablement. Please tell me, what are some mistakes that you see leaders do when they try to implement sales enablement within their companies?
Sure. So there's a couple of things to say, and it all depends on the maturity of where companies are with their sales enablement, because the first thing we see are some misconceptions about what sales enablement is, and that's very much dependent on the maturity of the company. And some of those misconceptions are, it's only a training piece of the business. All we do is training. Or some people think it's not strategic, it's just tactical execution of programs. Some organizations, leaders think it's just about moving the deals through the sales process and not the full picture. And I've also seen some teams think it's only about the tools and the technology to support sales process. So if those are the things that are on the plate, that leads to other issues. So those are some of the misconceptions that we see about sales enablement, and there are probably others I could mention. The other thing, to start combating those misconceptions, especially about the element of it not being strategic, is that we have to understand that sales enablement is in fact a strategic collaborative discipline to increase predictable sales results. That's what we're there for. What that boils down to is we have to make sure that the conversations that salespeople are having with their customers are of value. That's what it boils down to. And in order to do that, there are three key areas sales enablement has to cover. Commercial readiness, which means reps need to understand the internal systems and processes and tools and methodologies and policies and how to forecast, how to do account planning, how to do pricing, discount approvals, the whole thing, how to work the CRM systems, the quote tools, whatever. Then we have selling readiness. That's all the skills and the competencies of the salesperson. And then there's portfolio readiness, which is all about understanding the products, the solutions, the market we're going after, the buyers and the needs and the industries that we are targeting. And sales enablement needs to encompass all three of those. And so if you're only thinking it's training, you're missing that. If you're only thinking it's about, driving deals, you're missing some of those things. So that's some of the issues we see. Now, when it comes to actual execution of sales enablement, there's a lot that we see that definitely impacts the success of sales enablement. One is we are very inside out focused. So it's too much about us and who we are and how great we are and how great our products are, and not about customers. So we have to get that angle right. And it starts from working we work backwards from understanding the needs of customers, their problems, their goals, their dreams, their hopes. Then we work that into our enablement, as opposed to everything about us. So that's a big one. The other thing we often see is enablement teams that don't start with knowing what good looks like. They just go and do stuff, and then they try and correct it along the way. Whereas if we pause for a moment and looked at, well, what does a good sales enablement function look like? What does a good framework look like? What does a good onboarding program look like? What does a good academy look like? What does a good 60-minute webinar look like? From the strategic 30,000-foot view of enablement right down to the individual executables, you should know what good looks like. The other execution areas we see is not managing content well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit.
That's a common bias, right?
Yeah, that's a big focus. And they say, I saw a statistic that said content is 75% of the sales enablement function. I don't know if that number is too high, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was correct. So if you're not doing your content well, it impacts many, many areas. And we'll talk about content in a second.
Okay, great. You covered so many in here.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let's just try to unwrap it. So assuming that somebody will know of enablement and will nail the strategic part, so we'll not look it as a tactical thing or a thing that can be, oh, let's give those guys some time and some budget and they'll do the enablement thing and we'll have it done. So if they understand that it's a strategic point of doing the collaboration, enabling the sales in many, many areas to have the predicted revenue, how to go from knowing that it's important and knowing that it's a strategic thing into actually implementing it, because like there's a huge gap between knowing and doing, and it's sometimes like, you know, how to get from point A to point B.
Sure. So that's kind of about having a plan, right? And implementing that plan. So there's a lot to think about when you are going to start implementing. First of all, you need to have a plan. And there are 5 components or sections your plan needs to have. One is you need to have an understanding of the company that you are working for and its goals, strategy, needs, you know, hard, soft KPIs, problems, etc. 2, you need to have your own vision for your own enablement function. So what's your vision statement? What's your mission statement? What are your values? Then you need to have a well-structured enablement organization. So what's the functional structure? Who's on the team? What do they do? And, you know, what are we trying to achieve with our team? What are the problems we need to solve in enablement? The 4th piece is then obviously what services and programs are we going to execute that support all of those things? And lastly, how do we measure success? Now, that sounds very simple, right? But how do you go about building that plan? All right. And there's a complex, well, I don't want to say it is complex, but there's a step to building that plan. And I'll very quickly outline it for you. Number 1, you've got to understand and align to the company's go-to-market strategy. You need to know what that is. Too many sales enablement teams are too disconnected from the go-to-market. A lot of enablement people don't even know what go-to-market means. A go-to-market strategy is an action plan that specifies how a company, how a sales team will reach target customers and achieve competitive advantage. Enablement forget to look at that. Then you need to click behind the go-to-market and say, what are the problems in the business that we need to solve? All right, what are the needs? What are the challenges? What are the problems in the sales force, etc. So that what could impact the go-to-market? What could impact our ability to achieve those? And there's different ways of understanding those problems. We look internally, we look at our customers, but then there's also industry best practice. What is the best practice enablement teams doing? What are best practice sales organizations doing? The 4th piece is, or the 3rd step is you need to then look specifically at what does sales need to do on a day-to-day basis? What are the most critical tasks? They've got to build pipeline, they've got to progress deals, they've got to close like pros. That means they have to target the right buyers, they've got to gain access to those buyers, they've got to be able to have great conversations with those buyers, they've got to create shared vision and value, and they've got to be able to communicate and create business justification. Then comes your services and programs, because that's coming back to your first question. A lot of sales enablement teams that we work with, they've come up with all these things they're going to do for a year or this quarter, and I go, okay, so what part of the business, what problem is that solving? Oh, we just thought it's something we should do. So why are you doing it then? How are you justifying your expenses and your function? So you got to be able to identify all these things before you then put your services and programs on a piece of paper.
Yeah, you just mentioned such an important thing, like with all those shiny objects that you mentioned, technologies, trainings, like specials, it's so easy to jump into solutions without understanding the problems. And then like it simply can't work, right? Because you fix one area of enablement and you won't have an impact probably of the important things that were in a go-to-market strategy that you didn't even get to see, right? So you couldn't influence it the right way.
Oh, yeah. You're so right. So we end up doing the wrong things for the wrong reason. And at the end of the year, enablement gives itself a pat on the back and says, yay, look at all the stuff we did. But then you go to the sales leaders and you go, well, what impact did we make? They'll just go, I don't know. And it's not just enablement, marketing has the same challenge, so you really, really have to become a strategic, valued partner to the sales team. And that means you really need to understand the business, the go-to-market at the highest level, the problems inside sales, and then understand the day-to-day life of a sales organization. Otherwise, we're doing the wrong things for the wrong reason.
And from your experience, like which part of this framework is mostly forgotten or is delivered like wrongly and it ends up like just, destroying all the possible results that enablement could have brought for the company?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. And there's different ways to answer that question, because you can have a great plan and you can have done all the right things that we've just said you should do, but you fall into old habits, because one of the biggest issues we see is sales enablement try to be all things for all people. And, we've got this big vision and we set these goals at the beginning of the year, fantastic. But then sales manager X in region Y says, oh, I need a program to do this. The head of sales says, oh, I suddenly need a leadership summit. Now we start dropping balls, we start running in every direction. We have to get a grip on some of that. Now you can't stop all of that, because that's another mistake we see sales enablement teams doing, or sales enablement leaders doing, where they try to do what we call command and control. Like we stop all the random acts of enablement and we bring them under one. You can't do that either. So you can have the best plan in the world, but if you lose sight of it and you stay off course, you go off course, you're going to struggle. So that's one of the first things, is actually sticking with the plan. So it's one thing to have the plan, but to stick with the plan, which means ruthless prioritization. All right.
Ability to say no, right? Because like when there's
Correct.
a CEO coming like behind you, we
Correct.
need this.
Correct. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment, because that's crucial. So the other part of executing the plan that we see very few sales enablement teams master well is stakeholder management. It's all connected. Let me tell you, sales enablement is one of the toughest places to be in the business, because you are the glue in the middle of everyone's agenda. Sales wants this, marketing wants that, product marketing wants this, the CEO wants that, other executive, and you're the guy in the middle trying to create something that sales can actually use, right? Because that's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Can sales be effective in front of the customer? That's it. If they can't, doesn't matter about anything else. You have to be able to be great at stakeholder management, and that's a whole discipline on its own. And you have to be able to do that at a peer-to-peer level. So you have to be able to do it at the executive level, right down to the individual sales rep level. And you have to be able to do it across all the different functions in the business. So it's not an easy job. And it's a thankless position, because if sales are successful, well, they'll never give you the credit. But if the sales fail, you're the one that gets the whipping, right? Oh, enablement didn't do their job. We didn't get the right content. We didn't get it in time. We couldn't find anything. It wasn't good enough. You didn't. So it's a tough place to be. So staying on plan is crucial. Managing stakeholders and expectations along the way. The other thing about the plan that makes it hard is getting the balance between what we call the strategic and the tactical elements. So the strategic things that we repeat, that we are aligned to the go-to-market, aligned to the strategic goals of the business. And they shift as the year goes, because quarter to quarter, a sales leader might decide, oh, we're going to focus on this market, or we need to, versus all the run rate enablement. And so sometimes enablement people, they get caught up in one or the other. And you have to get a balance between strategic and tactical. You have to be good at firefighting versus planning. And that comes down to stakeholder management, expectation management, being able to say no, but you have to say no in the right way. Now, if you want to be a successful enablement person and you want to be a valued business partner, you say yes until you have to say no. But there's a way to do that. Because you don't want to just say no out the gate and then they see you as a waste of time and you're not really helping. But you also don't want to become all things for all people, because you will burn out. You will burn out. You cannot fight every battle.
Definitely.
So the content piece is a big part, another big part of the plan that people struggle with, and the content runs away with you. So when it comes to implementing the plan, staying on top of content, making sure you've got adequate content, it's effective, means it actually helps people do their job. It's not just information in documents, which means it has to be written properly. It has to be consumable by sales. They shouldn't have to look at it and go, oh, well, I need to call an expert to understand it. They should be able to look at it and go, I can have a conversation with my customer immediately about it. It needs to be that simple. Salespeople, they're not simple-minded, but they need simplicity to help them be effective. It has to be relevant. It has to be up to date, and it has to be comprehensive enough, but simple enough along the way. So content is a big part of a plan that runs away with them, plus the stakeholder management. Not staying close to the business, the ruthless prioritization. And then other things that we see people forgetting about is, forgetting about first line managers. It's like, well, what's your enablement plan for them? Because actually they're the most important part of the sales team. They're the weakest or the strongest link in your chain. So those are some of the things in terms of what we see people struggling with. And because enablement teams are so caught up in doing so much, the other issue we see is the one and done. So you have these great plans, and we're going to go and execute all these amazing programs, and we roll it out, and that's it. There's no follow-up, there's no reinforcement, there's no, and so you start to lose the return on investment, and then you wonder why there's no change in the business. So the one and done approach doesn't work. And actually, we see that all the time. Even some of the best sales enablement teams struggle with that because sheer workload gets in the way, constant firefighting and trying to keep up with all the asks of the business. So it's understandable, but it means you've actually got to think more strategically about it, invest in the right tools that can actually help you. We'd all like to have 100 people working in our teams, but we don't all have the budget for that, do we? So we'll never have, let me tell you, I have run very large enablement teams with tens of millions of dollars of budget, and I still didn't have enough. So you have to have tools.
So now you're coming to the important question. How do you find them? From what you're mentioning, it's like the demand for skills of the communication, of being able to understand the strategy and manage all those stakeholders. It's a really tough position. Like, what are some crucial skills that you are looking when you were like creating those teams for your customers, and where do you look for those people? Like, these are like talents.
That's tough questions. So you've mentioned some of the key skills already. World-class communication skills. That's not just the ability to show up with a nice looking presentation and a sparkle on your teeth. That is about hardcore peer-to-peer level communication, knowing how to engage at the executive level right down to individual contributor level. Number one. You have to understand how sales works, how they think, how the mentality works, how sales cycles work. Now, does that mean you have to have come from sales and been in sales? No. Some salespeople think, oh, you can only be an enablement person if you've been in sales. It gives you advantages, gives you some credibility, but it's not a have to have. And in some cases, it can be harmful. But so you don't have to look in the sales organization to get sales enablement people. You need empathy. You have to be able to empathize with sales. You've got to love salespeople. You've got to appreciate the pain they go through. You've got to understand the challenges in their roles, not just salespeople, but sales managers. You've also got to try and find out what it feels like to fail in front of the customer, for a meeting to go bad, for a deal to be lost. When you start to know what that feels like, you really build that empathy. Then you have to be able to simplify. Now, that's one of the toughest things we see people struggle with. We can all create a 100-page document, but how do you create the one-pager? What's the critical things because that's what sales needs. They don't have time to consume 50 hours of content. Nobody has time for that. You have to be able to simplify so that it's manageable, consumable, immediately applicable, and executable. You have to have, this is the other interesting thing about enablement, especially as you become an enablement manager and leader. You have to be able to have a good command of the detail, but also know when to keep it simple. Some people will say, oh, she's a great enablement leader, but she's too much in the weeds. You know what, if you're a CFO of a company and your CEO says, what's, our profit and loss in region A or B, and why is that happening? If the CFO can't answer the question, he's not a good CFO. He can't just give you, the overall targets and goals. He's got to know the details behind the numbers. It's the same with enablement. You can't stand in front of a chief revenue officer and say, I need to take your salespeople out the field for a week without being able to explain why, what's in that program, what's they're going to get out of it, who's presenting it. So you have to be able to have a command of the detail at the highest level. You have to have that executive presence. And then here's a big one, which we've mentioned, and it kind of, it underpins a lot of what we've said so far. You have to be able to know when to influence and when to adapt. When to say no or yes and then no, and when to say, okay, we'll make that happen. If you don't know when and how to influence and adapt, you will burn out. And I've seen a lot of sales enablement leaders quit their jobs very quickly because they burnt out, because they wanted to fight every battle, do everything, take on every task. And of course they mean well. We've all been there. We want to do it. But we also have to you have to know when and how to influence and adapt. Very, very important. And then to your question about where do you find these people, this is a very tough one, Adriana, because sales enablement, as we know what it is today, and sales enablement is emerging even further, and you've probably heard the term revenue enablement, right? So what is revenue enablement? Revenue enablement is not just the sales org, but every function in the business that's generating and affecting revenue. So support, customer success. That's what enablement is emerging into. We're not there yet, and we don't have people that can just run with that. But if you look at what sales enablement is today, what it's become, it is still an emerging profession. There are very few people in the world who can be ahead of an enablement function that can master the detail, but command the simplicity, that can be strategic and can be tactical, that can influence, that can adapt, that can run in and deliver a forecasting workshop, but can also do a planning session with a CEO. There's not many people that can do that yet. Not many, but we're getting there. So it's hard to find people. There are lots of enablement people out there. Everyone's got a different perspective of what enablement is. You can look inside the company if you've got people. So do you look in sales? Maybe pull somebody from sales. Do you go to L&D and pull somebody from there? It doesn't matter where in the business, you have to have the right mentality. And of course, you can go outside the company. So it's a tough one, Adriana, and I wish I had a simple answer. Where do you find such people? So I always encourage, individuals to build your talent pipeline, build your network, become an effective networker. Go look on LinkedIn, join groups, join the Sales Enablement Society around the world. There's lots of chapters around the world. Sign up for the enablement conferences and events and find out who these people are. Work with great vendors who work with lots of people around the world. I know a lot of great enablement people around the world, as you can imagine. So it's not a simple question, but they are out there.
Thanks so much. And basically people can look for specialists that's been there, because if you don't have an enablement team and you feel this is something that could help you, build your revenue, build your predictable revenue, definitely reach out for help. So
100%, because like I said, unless you've got tens of millions of dollars of budget and you can have a team of 50 people doing everything, you need to get the support. So there's a lot of vendors out there that can fill those little gaps and help you, whether it's just onboarding or just helping you execute flagship events or just a certain type of content or helping you with messaging or soft skill training. And I think it's good to get some support outside the company as well, even if you have a big team, because outside vendors, they tend to work with best practices. They've seen a lot. They can bring a lot of value to the table.
Definitely. Kathleen, thanks so much for your time today. Just one more question. If people would like to learn more from you or learn how you can help them, where should they find you?
So the best thing to do is go to my LinkedIn profile. So just look up Catherine Schalk. And in my summary section, you will see the option to get time in my calendar. And there's actually a link to my calendar in there, and just drop time in my calendar. And you can take a 15-minute call, a half an hour call, and just literally just drop space in my calendar, or just hit me up with questions on LinkedIn. My email address is also on LinkedIn, so fire away. Anything we can do to help, even if it's just to bounce ideas, if you want to just, for us to just look at something that you're planning and give you some guidance, whether it's, even if there's no revenue that gets exchanged in the process, we just love to serve and help along the way. So just hit me up anytime. So best place is to go to my LinkedIn profile, where you can see my contact details and my calendar.
Thanks so much for sharing. And it was a pleasure to talk to you today.
No, thank you, Adriana. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be able to help others along this journey, because I've been in enablement now, maybe 15 years. So I have the advantage of having a lot of years behind me. So happy to support, up and coming enablement professionals, but also people who are well down the path. So thank you for the time.
Thanks again.